everyone. Today we have Li Hui Li, Director, Head of Data-Driven Underwriting from Swiss Re, as well as Max Ang, Insurance Technology Research Advisor APAC from Celent. In this series, we are collaborating with Celent to bring you the latest insights on different topics within the insurance ecosystem. Today, we'll be exploring digital health underwriting, navigating challenges, and embracing opportunities. I'm Tricia, Director of InsureTech Connect Asia. We'll be delving into digital health underwriting landscape marked by both hurdles and promising prospects, and I'm excited to host this podcast as we discuss on opportunities for insurers to leverage data-driven insights and innovate in risk assessment. First, before we start, Li Hui and Max, if you could share a little on your background, I think it will help our listeners today to understand a little bit more about what you do. Li Hui, would you like to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tricia. So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. As Tricia mentioned, my name is Li Hui. I head up data-driven underwriting for Swiss Re under the Reinsurance Solutions division and cover primarily APAC region. But I've been in Swiss Re for 9 years now, looking at different innovations, product developments, different underwriting propositions, and so on. And I'm very excited about what we're doing here in Reinsurance Solutions, right? Because actually what we're trying to do now in this division is really to bring all our 160 years of our risk knowledge, embed them into digital offerings so that it becomes accessible for not just our clients, but also partners and anyone who has an idea around how they think they could use like 160 years of risk insights expertise to maybe enhance or enrich their offering and make it, a lot more interesting for the insurance landscape. So yeah, I'm very excited to share about what we do here. And coincidentally, one of the products that I look after is also called digital health underwriting. So I think today we will have some chance to talk about, the product itself, what we do, and also in the broader context of in the insurance industry, what digital health underwriting can do for us.
Thank you, Li Hui. And Max, yourself?
Hey, thank you, Tricia. So I'm Max. I'm based in Singapore, and I cover the Celent research coverage in terms of insurance for the Asia Pacific region primarily. So I have a background in the data science as well. So Celent is actually a research advisory firm that publishes insights into the financial services industry and how they apply technology in their various activities. And in my domain, I look at the insurance sector and as well as application of technology alongside things like data science, innovation, and so on. So today I'll be sharing more about some of the use cases and some of my perspective coming from a research advisory firm. Yeah.
Thank you, Max. I think if you guys have stayed tuned with the ITC Asia podcast, you have seen Max around in our various podcasts. So he's not a new face, but we're really excited to have both of them here today. I think without further ado, let's go straight into our first question. How can digital health underwriting balance the need for access to personal health data with concerns about privacy and data security? Maybe Li Hui, we can start with you.
Yeah. But before I go into answering that question, maybe I thought I'll set a bit of context for the audience here, because I actually alluded to it earlier, right? Because digital health underwriting is both a product for Swiss Re, as well as in the broader context of that term, it can mean using health data that are available in the digital format. Could be lifestyle data, could be electronic health records, could be anything that is available, biometric data that could then be used for underwriting purposes, right? So I think probably today we will use it quite interchangeably, but I will try to make a reference to Swiss Re digital health underwriting if I'm referring to my product and maybe more broadly digital health underwriting. So in terms of digital health underwriting and balancing the need for concerns around privacy and data security, I kind of think about my own consumer experience, right? So if I think about, me as an Instagram user, I actually am sharing a lot of data with Instagram, but I still use it and I still like it and I still like the recommendations they give me. And why? Because it's the customer experience and the customer journey and the customer understanding, right? So if you ask me in respect of in the insurance industry, in respect of digital health underwriting, how do we balance that? I think it's really around that customer journey and experience that we are giving to the customer. Are we giving a quicker experience? Is it faster to issue a policy to underwrite the case? Is it cheaper? Like, are the data that we are getting going to help make the cost of the policy cheaper, or maybe it will be cheaper on the operation piece for insurers? is it accurate? Is it going to be help make the the landscape more accurate? Is the risk assessment going to improve because we get all these data? Or is it going to be easier for the customer to use the information, right? Or to use the platform? And I think if we could answer all of these, then I think we have our answer about addressing the customer's concern. Because if it's easy, it's cheaper, it's quicker, why not? Why would they not want to use it? And I think the last thing, maybe it's also around options. So I think we need to give consumers the option on whether or not they want to use it. What are they giving to the insurers and what are they not giving? So if you have that open, transparent communication and you also give them the option to choose, then I think, there's really no reason why customers would actually feel that they don't have a choice, or that they feel like their privacy concerns are not met. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Max, anything to add as well?
So I think I'll come in more from the probably data management perspective and the regulations. I think for me, if you want to strike a balance, between the needs for personal health data with concerns over privacy and data security, I think firstly we need to have more robust data protection and security protocols to be implemented to ensure that the health data that we are storing and transmitting are actually secure. So example is like, how do the insurers get access to the public health data, and what should we do to provide certain layers of security and access control. So that's for one. I mean, second is more on getting the consent from the individuals to want to share that kind of data. I will elaborate more about this in the use case later that I will share. And I think the third one is also on the de-identification of data itself. We have to make sure it's anonymized, and there's certain techniques involved to ensure that we cannot identify a particular person based on the kind of traits or variables that we're using. And I think lastly is also working hand in hand with the regulatory frameworks and industry standards, seeing how can insurers include these guidelines or frameworks into their own system and processes as well, so that we can govern the collection and then the use and the protection of the personal data that you intend to use in the particular model itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Max mentioned quite a number of good points. I think just to write on to what you mentioned earlier, Max, what are some of the key challenges faced by insurance companies in that case, right, in implementing digital health underwriting, and how can these challenges be overcome?
I think some of the challenges that I see insurers face is actually, the first one is on the data quality and availability. So we talk about wanting to have alternate data usage and so on, but the question also comes on how good is the data externally, and is my internal data actually good enough to create the models that I want? Sometimes even internal data is actually sufficient. So those are some thoughts around data quality and availability. I think the second part is on data integration and interoperability. So even if you want to access certain data, we have to make sure that it's integrated well with the current system. So you do not want to bring in something that is just not working well together, and you do not get a good data set at the end of it. And also relate to privacy and concern, security concerns, which I raised earlier. Those are also some challenges that you have to face. You have to know, what are you collecting, and do those infringe on certain customers' protection rights and so on. And this leads to ethics considerations. So ethical consideration is more on, can we prevent any bias or say discrimination in the models itself? So at Celent, we did have a model insurer winner recently, Income Insurance. They shared with us how they incorporate, like generative AI for ethical AI. And how it works is that the chief data officer, the chief risk officer, they come together to integrate ethical AI into their model risk management process. And they should embed the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, FEED principles into the model risk process itself. So they're actually combining the regulatory framework into the system itself. I think this is a very good way of developing, being very conscious of putting ethics into the system itself. And then this can help you to develop an analytical center of excellence within the organization. And you, at the same time, you do adhere to certain practices that is advocated by the regulatory body. And I think the last part, to put a bit more of context into regulatory compliance, I think at least in Singapore context, you have to be aware of the PDPA guidelines. to ensure that we do not infringe any of such issues. Yeah. So I think these are some of the challenges that we do see, but I think ultimately it's more on collaboration with the healthcare providers, the insurers, or even the stakeholders that are involved in this process, and to make sure that your data management capabilities are strong enough to bring in things like guidelines from the regulators, and to just be more transparent and have open dialogue with everyone in the circle that is building up this process. Yeah.
Thank you, Max. And I think, Li Hui, coming from Swiss Re, you probably have a lot of challenges that you face on a daily basis, revolving around this topic. Would you like to share like how what are some of the challenges first, of course, and then how is Swiss Re from a corporate standpoint is addressing some of the challenges as well?
Yeah, so I really agree with what Max mentioned earlier about all the different points, right? And I think we see that as well. How maybe I wanted to approach this question is maybe I share about it in terms of like different markets and the uniqueness of the different markets that I see. So maybe I touch on two main markets like US and China. So in the US, I think the challenge that we see insurers face around this topic of digital health underwriting is that of abundance. So there is literally just too much data. They have electronic health records already available in the hospitals. 90% or more of the hospitals have the records. These records are made available to insurers, either directly or via some of these EHR aggregators. There are also, prescription histories. There are diagnosis, hospital discharge summaries, billing records, everything, right? Different codes, different formats, and their problem is too much data, too many data of different formats, duplicated data that may or may not be useful for underwriting assessment, because one needs to remember that these are primarily used for patient care and they are not meant for underwriting use cases, right? So yeah, so that alone is one big problem. And another problem then is also from an insurer perspective, they now have the means to connect and integrate to an EHR provider, but the data could either be ingested in the form of a PDF or it could be ingested in a form of JSON, right? And if your systems are not set up to take in the JSON and then be able to do some data processing with that, then that data is lost on you. You can't really do anything meaningful with the data. So then what a lot of the insurers are still doing is getting the PDF records. And can you imagine like an underwriter having like 14 or 15 different records open on their screens and having to pause through every single record and being able to make sense of it from an underwriting perspective? That is literally the problem of too much data, right? So I think in the US, the problem is how do they convert all that JSON into something that is very usable, into a dashboard that our clients' underwriting teams can actually make sense of. And that is something that Swiss Re Solutions had actually developed to kind of alleviate that particular concern. So we have a solution basically offering them that dashboard, being able to give them a timeline view of, like, say, their HbA1c readings, being able to then also allow the underwriters to click on a specific reading and be able to bring them back to the PDF record if that's necessary. And so you can imagine like this interactivity between a dashboard versus the actual records that is sitting with the hospitals. That's going to be immensely helpful for the underwriting teams. So this is the problem in US. But then in China, or maybe even in other parts of APAC, is totally different, right? So the challenge in China, APAC, is really that we don't really have EHR records. So it's more around the scarcity of these records for insurance purposes. And without these records, what we then do is basically to work with the medical evidences that we have. And typically these are called for by the insurers. And it really depends across markets, across the insurer panels or network providers, right? Some of these are still being transmitted back to the insurers in a PDF format. Some of it can be already in a digital format. And being able to read them, process them quickly, underwrite the cases is still a big challenge for the underwriting teams, especially during peak periods when you get a lot of cases coming in. And then also our industry is faced with, the talent crunch, especially on the underwriting side. So you have also a lot of junior underwriters that are getting up to speed on their underwriting quality, and you need to be able to train them well. So, and some of them maybe finding some of these records may be a bit too complex, right? So then I think out of these challenges, what we did from Swiss Re Solutions is basically to develop this offering called digital health underwriting. So we help to digitize the record, and we also help to make an assessment of the records. And that's exactly what we implemented in China. So we leverage technologies like optical character recognition, OCR, natural language processing, NLP, to help to make sense of the data from these PDF records to kind of extract all the necessary pertinent information. We also leverage a lot of our in-house domain knowledge to group and categorize some of these medical terminologies so that they become usable in our underwriting assessment. So literally, we extract the data, we automate the underwriting of that. And so we are able to alleviate a huge chunk of the workload of the underwriting teams. And you can see that between US and China is two different problems, but basically it's still the problem of how do we deal with the digital health data, right? And I think one other maybe interesting topic to maybe share is really around then, beyond just looking at this operational piece, how can insurers also look at the product development piece? Because what we hear from our customers in some of our Swiss Re survey is that customers actually are open to answering full underwriting questions to share more data if they could get a discount, or they could get a higher coverage or other benefits from the policies or the products that they were recommended. And so I would also say that one of the challenges from our industry is how can we think about this customer journey, these operations jointly with product development, and kind of make it a bit more interesting for the end consumer in terms of the coverages that they can get or the way we sell them different products and services.
Thank you. I think, Li Hui, you mentioned two extreme ends of the spectrum about, how the US has like a lot of data, but then having the difficulty to leverage on what is necessary for your underwriters versus the scarcity of data in certain parts of APAC, for example, in China. I think just going a little bit deeper into that as well, in what ways can digital health underwriting contribute to more accurate risk assessment and pricing in the insurance industry, considering the vast amount of data or the lack of it, and what are some of the potential implications for consumers themselves? I think earlier you mentioned that, consumers are quite willing to perhaps share a little bit more data about themselves in exchange for certain perks that they would receive. But, in what way can all these use cases, or rather the things that you have been experiencing, help to contribute to more accurate risk assessment and pricing for the insurance ecosystem in general?
Yeah, my personal view is that risk assessment and pricing can only be positively impacted by digital health data. But this health data needs to be holistic and needs to be collected over a period of time. I think those are probably like some of the caveats that I will put in. And I make this conclusion from two observations, right? So one is I worked with some of the actuaries on trying to quantify the expected benefit of different types of underwriting. So we explored, like, say, full underwriting, where customer discloses to the insurer a set of questions. We explored things like lifestyle underwriting. So some over the last few years, I think we've been, as an industry, we've been looking at how to leverage like lifestyle data, sleep data, nutrition, just all these modifiable risk factors in underwriting process. There are also some of these non-disclosure models that we've built with our clients or our partners. So I also looked at that with the actuaries. And then lastly, medical evidence data, right? So like literally lab reports, urinalysis, ECGs, and so on. And when we try to quantify it, I would say that basically full underwriting gives you maybe like 5 years of expected benefit. Lifestyle and non-disclosure models, it's still relatively new. We need to collect it over a period of time, so it's still uncertain in terms of the actual number of years of benefit. And then when you look at medical evidence data, it gives you up to 10 years of expected benefit. So just along this spectrum of like 4 different buckets of underwriting, you see that medical evidence data digital health data remains the gold standard in underwriting assessment. And so being able to collect that data over a period of time for all of your customers is going to be that defining or differentiating factor in a data-driven future. My second observation is also then looking at some of the predictive models that we've implemented with clients to improve straight-through processing rates or to allow for guaranteed issue or simplified issue campaigns, right? And when we look at these models, actually, what we see is that these models are making a prediction out of the data that's available from the insurer, available from disclosures like from disclosures of underwriting engines like Magnum, distribution data, claims data. And the top contributing factor of these models remains medical in nature. So whether or not a customer is a good risk is still largely dependent on the medical history rather than, the distribution or any other data. So then I think, health data is still going to be the gold standard. And if insurers wants to transform the way we price or assess risk, collecting that health data is going to be a key aspect. But collecting it in a way that is structured and properly categorized with the right data structure, tagged, so that you can reuse that in data-driven models in future predictive underwriting landscapes is going to be key, right? Because then that is when you can move to the next level, which is how it can then impact and improve the customer proposition. Because then you really know like the disease prediction, the impact of personalized risk assessment for each individual, and then you can really impact their products and their pricing and their features for each individual customer.
Thank you, Li Hui. And I think Max, I've seen you. You look like you're thinking about what Li Hui is talking about earlier. Any thoughts to add on to what she just mentioned as well?
Yeah, I think Li Hui shared quite a very comprehensive view, but I will give you more from him from some insurance case studies that I've seen for digital health underwriting or how they work with claims data and so on. I think so. We had an incident case with John Hancock from the US insurer in US where they tried to build a social network model for long-term care insurance. And alongside that, they also take in external data, and the external data not only includes just the medical records and so on. They look at medical profiles a lot with geofencing and even encourage uploading of medical images and information. So what they do with this information was that they created a caregiver application because they're on a case study of long-term care insurance. And so by having a separate application of caregiver, just for the caregivers themselves, they can allow electronic visit verifications for home visits and care. And so this actually brings in together the ecosystem of the caregivers alongside the policyholders themselves who may benefit from this kind of insurance. And the kind of data that they use, they look at geofencing as an aspect of external data. So that's one case study. I think the other one for personalized risk assessments that we come across also from Cathay Life. So they make use of a claim case review decision framework. What they do with that is that they make a recommender of claims review, and then that actually can expedite the way they review claims and whether they should pay that out in future. And this platform does include certain actual risk scenarios involved. So it's not just data that you collected based on transactional data, but they do look at getting the feedback from the actual person who's doing the claims and what they think should be in the scenario itself, and they include that in the model. And this overall helps in the risk score validation, which also impacts how all this can improve underwriting later for them as a way of, as a result of using the claims data. So this is another way of how an insurance company does provide personalized risk assessment based on the data that they have. So I think these are at least two cases that I can share. I think other benefits could be, having real-time monitoring and predictive analytics. I think so Li Hui did share a bit about that as well. But I think there's some implication that we can consider. I think we alluded that a couple of times throughout this conversation is the privacy concerns, the potential discrimination of the data itself. So because we are collecting a lot of these sensitive health records, we have to make sure that we get the consent and to ensure that the models themselves do not veer into a certain category that's not representative of the population that you hope to serve. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think both Li Hui and Max, you covered a little bit on the last question that we have in this podcast, but I wanted to bring it up again to go a bit deeper. Maybe Max, we can start with you first. How might advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning enhance the effectiveness of digital health underwriting processes? I think you mentioned earlier on ethical considerations as well. So what kind of ethical considerations should be taken into account?
I think because I mentioned about the ethicals of including the regulatory frameworks inside the system itself. I think the other part to take note of the process itself, like how are you managing your current workflow? So example of like AI ML process, like ML ops itself, how do you organize the various aspects from the collection itself all the way to the development and to the rollout to the customers? That particular piece is where you can actually include ethical considerations. Like you can actually put in checks to see that if my model is running at this certain threshold or limits or categorization, could I also include in certain checks to ensure that it actually look out for certain variables that may be not ethical in nature? Like could it be biased to a certain gender, or could it be biased to a certain age group when it produces its output? So those checks can actually be reviewed by the audit team externally out of the data science team, and that's how we can consider or put in together ethical considerations into the system process. So that's one way. I think the other way of how the AI ML could enhance the way you could look at underwriting is to simplify the user experience. I think this is what Li Hui actually did share about as well. But to bring a case of AIA, what they did was that they had a strategy where they wanted to put like AI at the heart of their innovation. And then for the user experience, they make the underwriting experience as easy as possible by maybe having 3 to 5 questions for you to answer, and then you get a medical approved policy. Or the other way is to make sure that you have a guaranteed issue offer where there's no underwriting involved, but you're actually depending a lot on the data behind the scenes. I think that's some form of innovation whereby they go beyond just the rule base. They actually put in some of the models, machine learning expert models into the scoring itself. And then along the way, how they detect whether is it going against certain rules is to check for probably fraud, waste, and abuse scenarios. Is this going against certain criteria that I think may lead to this activity being fraudulent? So these are how they sort of include kind of check and balances into the system to make sure that we do not go against or at least harm the customer at the end. So I think that's how some ways of including AI ML together with the ethical considerations into the system processes. Yeah.
Thank you. And Li Hui, from your side?
Yeah, I think Max touched on quite a broad piece already. What maybe I want to try and add on is maybe some views around, is it really necessary to leverage the most advanced technology in whatever we are trying to push out on the underwriting front, right? Because if you think about it, underwriting is really around risk control and risk selection. And being able to make sure that we make a fair assessment of our customers and that it's all based on sound fundamentals and not prone to any data biases is super important, right? So then if you're making an underwriting decision or at least an underwriting recommendation, you probably in the short term want to still rely on very tried and tested methods, because this is huge for the insurers, and it can change the portfolio that they are getting in, right? So what has been tried and tested is really still some of the underwriting engines, like rule-based engines that are coded based on logic and decisions that you can actually backtrack and explain. So I think if we're talking about underwriting recommendation on the underwriting side, using digital health data, still the best way would still be to use a rules engine, which is what we have in Magnum, what we have in digital health underwriting in Swiss Re, because these are all explainable. We can all explain the evidence-based research that's sitting under it. For example, digital health underwriting is actually aligned with life guides. So any decision or recommendation that's made off of this second level medical evidence is explainable, and that would then help clients, insurers to be able to feel, assured in making that recommendation, right? But then I think where AI/ML or some of these new technologies can really play a part is in the data preparation piece. So we talked about some of the challenges with the data, and I think we also recognize that the medical data that we have today for insurance purposes is primarily used for healthcare purposes. So being able to make sense of that data, prepare that data, process it, standardize it such that it's usable in the insurance context, it's going to be super important. And that is, I think, a lower risk area to kind of focus on, and also a very important area to focus on. So yeah, I would say that probably if I could, look in the next 2, 3, 5 years, the data preparation processing piece would be key in how we leverage some of these advancements in AI ML. But the underlying recommendation piece, I think it's still very much needs to be explainable and be able to be based on sound fundamentals. And last point around the ethical considerations as well, right? So I think this is going to be more and more important, especially also for underwriting teams. Their functions are going to change in terms of not just being a medical expert. They also need to then know how to assess models and be able to orchestrate, from an overall bird's eye view perspective, what the different systems come into play on an overall workflow, right? So I think this is something also that Swiss Re had been starting to work with clients and advise them on how to ensure that the same safeguards in today's underwriting processes can continue to exist in that AI ML data-driven underwriting environment where you have many systems, different partners, different external data coming into your ecosystem, and we try to advise clients on that and still using the fundamentals of today. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that concludes the end of our podcast today. Thanks so much once again for joining us, Li Hui and Max. And for those of you that have stayed with us till the end of the podcast, we thank you as well, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You.